As has been the tradition, the final question has always needed the longest answer possible, so this time I figured, you know what, let's make the final video into one giant question and tell the YouTuber to go fuck himself again. Now this is actually 3 questions that are all discussing the same topic, and as you guys are going to see, these 3 guys fall on the opposite ends of one specific topic: gun control. And based on what these 3 guys asked, you're going to see that 2 of them fall on the opposite ends of the gun spectrum, and we have one outsider wondering what the fuck is wrong with the United States. I'm wondering the same thing, and I fucking live here. So the first question comes from a sarcastic AZN. How many more debates on gun control will it take for gun grabbers to understand that you will never get the guns out of criminals' hands? The second question comes from AVX Gamer. How many years do you think it will be before mass shootings and school shootings finally force some kind of change in the country? And the third question came over from Prestige Gamers. The guy with no gamer tag asked, as someone from the UK, the media primarily portrays the pro-gun views as gun ownership deters and can prevent crime. To approach the debate from this perspective, how many guns does it take to prevent and stop a crime from occurring? Now, in past question and answer session videos, I've talked about gun control, gun problems, gun responsibility, access to guns, and the Second Amendment. I make my opinions about it no secret, because living in New York, where gun crimes were a daily problem, that has shaped my view of guns. Now, over the past 20 to 25 years, we've actually lowered significantly our gun crime in New York City. I mean, you can even go back to the 70s when it was an utterly fucking shit show out there. It was like the Wild Wild West of the 70s. To what it is now, compared to other bigger cities, oh yeah, New York City has definitely made strides between laws, law enforcement, and better education of what guns can do. So my opinions are going to be different from someone who lives in the middle, like, fucking nowhere in Montana, who doesn't have to worry about crime as opposed to like a grizzly bear attacking them. So obviously, I'm going to address each question, but I don't want to harp on things that I've already said in past videos about the same topic. So Sarcastic AZM was the first one. He wants to know, how many debates does it take to know you can't get the guns from criminals? And the answer to that is 0, because the conversations and debates have not been about taking guns from anyone. The conversations have been about how to prevent people who are not responsible enough to have guns and from getting their hands on weapons through loopholes in the future. The conversations and laws being discussed are banning certain types of guns and accessories, not the guns themselves, and not taking guns from people. It's not retroactive. Matter of fact, the only person who has stated that he wants to take guns out of people's hands is Donald Trump, who the NRA gave $30 million to just for his campaign. And he wanted to do it without due process. Not a single politician or sitting president has ever stated they would take guns away from people, let alone without due process. Are you fucking kidding me? Never happened. Ever. Period. Full stop. And this is someone the NRA supports. Now, obviously, Donald Trump says whatever fucking first thought comes to his goddamn tiny brain. He doesn't think that shit through. It's like, oh, here's a thought, and then it goes straight out of his mouth. So that was the first thing that he said, let's take guns away without due process, not realizing what the fuck he was talking about. But in any event, the position of gun control is about slowing down and stopping mass killings first. It's about getting high-powered military-grade weapons out of the hands of untrained civilians. It's not about taking every gun. It's not even about getting them out of the hands of criminals right now, because that's a separate issue that has to be addressed. Although, oddly enough, you do realize there are laws on the books that take guns away from criminals though, right? You know that, right? They're not federal laws, but certain states and certain localities will confiscate legally licensed weapons from people who have committed certain crimes. For example, certain cities will take away your guns if you've committed domestic violence, or if you've been convicted with assault with a weapon, or firing at police officers even if you don't hit them, or even in some of the other states that are very pro-gun friendly. If you commit a hunting violation, such as poaching or killing an endangered animal purposely, you will lose your gun license. And if you lose your gun license, you will lose access to your gun. So even though we don't have a law on the books that says, well, the government's going to go and just take your gun from you, there are laws that state if you commit a crime, you will lose access to your guns, and the guns can be legally taken for you. But taking guns from everyday citizens isn't happening right now. And taking guns away from criminals who illegally have guns already is obviously not possible, as you mentioned. You don't know if somebody illegally has a gun and what the fuck they're doing with the gun until you catch the motherfucker. But the debates and laws being proposed are how to prevent mass shootings from occurring, which almost everyone can agree something needs to be done about this. You know, after addressing mass shootings, The next step has to be inner city crime, because illegal handguns are more of an everyday issue that you see more than the semi-automatic military-grade weapons. You see more killings from illegal handguns than you do from mass shootings. So if the government is able to at least address mass shootings, then the next thing on their agenda has to be coming up with solutions to solve local gun violence, especially in major cities like Chicago, Baltimore, Detroit. All those cities have some of the strictest gun laws in the nation. However, what ends up happening is the guns from outside the cities are then funneled into the city. So that's obviously something that'll be down the road. But for now, nobody is taking guns away from anybody. It's preventing people in the future from actually getting their hands on these weapons. AVX Gamer asked the question, how many years is it going to be until we see change? And the unfortunate answer, it isn't going to be years. It's going to be a certain instance that's going to cause gun control. And I can tell you right now, unless gun control politicians take control of all three branches of government, the Senate, the House of Representatives, and the presidency, it's going to be at least 3 more years until something meaningful is done. As long as Trump is president, as long as Mike Pence is the vice president, even if Trump gets impeached, no gun laws are going to be passed in the next couple of years. So essentially what would have to happen 3 years from now, if gun control advocates take over all 3 branches of the government, that's the first time you might actually see a law being passed. But I can tell you right now, what it's going to take before meaningful change is made is if religious terrorists start using our loopholes to get guns legally and kill people. Now listen, this is a disgusting and sickening thing to even think about and say, but the reality is if a terrorist or a terrorist group used our legal loopholes to get access to guns and committed a mass shooting so horrible that even the NRA realizes the problem, then there will actually be a change. Now, of course, if this were to occur, you know, obviously the first things they're going to point out are going to be religion and visas and citizenship and every other conservative talking point other than the guns themselves. But if an American-born Muslim got access to weapons and was brainwashed by a foreign terrorist group and shot up a target that was near and dear to NRA members, you know there would be a change at that point. If an NRA executive lost their child, their spouse, their parent to a senseless act of violence by a religious terrorist who legally got access to a high-powered weapon through loopholes, then you would see the loopholes close after a few months of finger pointing. Now, obviously, they'll point their fingers at everything else. Oh, he was Islamic. He was a Muslim. He shouldn't have been in this country. Yeah, great. His parents weren't born here, but he's a fucking anchor baby. That would be the only way you would see it happen without the gun control advocates taking over every portion of the government. It would have to be something so heinous that even the NRA would sit there and be like, this is fucked up. It's nothing to laugh at, but essentially that's what it's going to take at this point in order to have some meaningful gun change in this country. You know what's funny? You know when's the last time this country actually passed sweeping gun legislation? This is probably not going to come as a shock to anyone, but it was during the civil rights movements of the 1960s when African Americans were peacefully protesting for equality. You know why? Because for every Martin Luther King Jr. peaceful protest, there was a protest by militant groups of either the Black Panthers or the Nation of Islam who were all but willing to show their force with guns and weapons. Legally, I might add. If they went to sit-ins, if they went to actual protests, they brought their weapons. They brought high-powered weapons. They didn't shoot anybody with them, but they certainly pointed them at the police. And because of that, because of those protests, old white men were scared of black men legally owning guns. They went on to pass background checks and criminal checks before these men got their hands on weapons. You know, Chris Rock once joked that if you want to see gun control in this country come back, the best way to do it is to give every black man in this country a gun. It's true. Imagine this. If you gave every black man in this country an AR-15, watch how fucking fast laws will be passed again. And even though obviously that's the most extreme example, you know that's never going to happen, white politicians would be passing laws instantly. If you gave black men, Muslim followers, and even Spanish-looking people, specifically Mexicans, even if they're here in the country legally, oh, we would have more gun laws in a minute, motherfucker. As soon as minorities would have more guns than white men, forget it. It's over. We would instantly have gun control, and they would say, yeah, you're a minority. You can't even have guns in this motherfucker. Now, as for the guy with no gamer tag, he's basically asking how many guns does it take to stop a crime? For me, it's +1 more for every criminal committing that crime. So here's my example. If 3 people are trying to hold up a convenience store, then 4 guns are going to stop that crime. If 5 people are robbing a bank, then 6 guns will stop that shit. But obviously that's a facetious answer to your question, because I know the heart of your concept is, why do Americans need so many weapons? Why is it that when crimes of mass murder are committed, the answer is more guns? While I don't have a short answer to that, I do have an answer of who you have to blame for this bullshit. And believe it or not, it's not the NRA. It's England. Yes, motherfucker, England. You know why? Because after we won the Revolutionary War, we kicked your asses back across the pond, England still wanted to come back and take over the country. They didn't want to let their prize colony turn independent and still considered waging another war, along with the Dutch and the Spanish who were considering takeovers, but obviously they never fully invested in a war. Because of that fear, the founding fathers of this country created the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. The cause of this amendment is always going to be scrutinized by historians, but the Federalist Papers give you a sense as to why it was created. One of the easiest ways to overthrow a region is to force them to give up their methods of defense. Force them into not having a way to fight back. And that was a European tactic for centuries, going back to the Bronze Age, the Gilded Ages, the Dark Ages. That was always a way to easily win a war. For a nation that was just started, the United States' only way to combat this was to create laws that tell citizens you have the right to arm yourselves and keep your arms, even if a government were to try and take that away from you, a foreign or domestic government, it didn't matter. In case England came back, right? In case they succeeded in overthrowing this newly created country, one of the things they would probably tell you is you have to lay your guns down. The Federalist Papers give a better explanation in full for this. Because the country was in its infancy, there was no way a fully trained military was going to be possible at that time. They didn't have enough people and they didn't have enough time. Instead, arming normal citizens was the best bet against any foreign power trying to take over, whether it was England, France, Spain, you name it. But that was in the 1700s. We're almost 250 fucking years away from that. The principle of the Second Amendment was to give the newly formed country a way to defend itself by using the citizens as its militia, and not to let any foreign country dictate what you were going to tell us to do with our guns and our way of defending ourselves. Over the next 250 years, the premise of this law has been skewed in multiple ways. It's become a law that says you now have the right to defend yourself. You have the right to own any gun you want. The government can't restrict any gun because it violates the Second Amendment. And these are blatant misrepresentations of the amendment, and the exploitation of the spirit of the amendment has now become the problem. But that's all because England wanted to invade us again. So I blame you tea-drinking, crimpet-eating motherfuckers. No, but here's the reality. And this is where I want to combine all three questions into more of a detailed explanation. Nobody argues that the Second Amendment is wrong. The argument for gun control groups is the principle of it is correct, but the application of it needs to be updated. We're not at war with England. There's no foreign government that's going to take our guns away, especially now that we have a trained military, something we didn't have when that bill was written. There's no country that's going to try and say, you know what, I feel like taking over the United States right now. It's not going to happen. The spirit of the bill was protection against invasions and uniting a country to protect itself. But that's been established. We're not under threat of being taken over anymore. The current threat, though, is ourselves. We're not taking responsibility for ourselves within our country now. And that's what gun control has been about. Gun advocates and NRA supporters cannot point to a single law that has ever been suggested where the law takes guns away from responsible owners. If you own guns, have never committed a crime, responsibly take care of your weapons, then gun control shouldn't be an issue for you. The goal is something that even the NRA wants. Prevent irresponsible, irrational, illegal sales and transactions of guns to people who should not have them. People can agree that is something that is needed. The challenge that we have is there are so many weapons and guns available out there that no matter what laws you come up with, the guns will still be available to people who want them. But that doesn't mean you just give up, right? Does the car industry say, well, accidents are going to happen, so people are going to die, might as well just let all cars go 100 miles an hour instantly and remove all seatbelts and airbags? No, they don't do that. Do airline industries say, well, crashes are going to occur, so why bother adding more safety features if all the people are going to die in the crash anyway? You know, the argument that guns aren't the problem, guns don't kill people, people kill people, you know that saying, that's 100% true. Which is why regulating what people get access to is referred to as a potential solution. If the argument is that people kill people, we can't regulate people, then at least try to regulate what people can get access to. That's a mild step in the direction of fixing shit. Because the more we do nothing, the more this is going to continue to go on. And while gun control laws and gun responsibility laws and access laws won't stop crime now, they won't end mass shootings now, we can at least attempt to slow them down. We can at least try to put a dent in future killings and future senseless deaths over a longer period of time. Play the long game. Incrementally reach a point where we reduce this country's senseless violence. But doing nothing means the same results are going to occur each and every day. As long as nothing is done, our society is going to continue to be numbed every time we hear one of these mass shootings have occurred. every month these shits seem to be occurring. Every other month these shits seem to be occurring. But in the end, when it happens, all you hear is thoughts and prayers. Our thoughts and prayers are with people. You know, thoughts and prayers don't exactly stop bullets in this motherfucker. Or we could just do what I said at the very beginning. Just give everybody guns, and we just have a giant duel outside in the middle of fucking nowhere, and we see who the last people standing are. 365 million people. Put them all in the middle like fucking Kansas and Nebraska. Just all start shooting each other, and the last people standing are the ones that should be able to create the gun laws. How about that? That actually works in this motherfucker. Anyways, that does it for my first themed question and answer session. As I mentioned, guys, I'm actually going to have a few more of these in the future. The next one that I have are going to be a little bit more complex. You guys will be able to ask a few more questions that start with another phrase. We're going to keep the Jeopardy rule in this motherfucker. So as always, rate, comment, subscribe, and all that good shit, and I'll see you guys in the next video.